Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening, where you'll be learning more about proposed changes to the way Ofsted inspects, and tonight we're having a particular focus on early years. So by way of introduction, my name's Jane Coward and I'm Deputy Director for Early Years Regulatory Policy and Practice. I'm joined with several colleagues this evening. So we have Helen Matthews joining us. She's our Deputy Director for Inspection Improvement.
Hello everyone.
We're also joined by Wendy Radcliffe, His Majesty's Inspector and Principal Officer for Early Years Education Policy. We also have Sam Sleeman-Boss, and she'll be speaking later on. She's an Early Years Regulatory Inspector and our Early Education Quality and Practice Lead. And last but not least, we've got Jude Simpson, Senior His Majesty's Inspector in the Inspection Improvement Team, and she has a very important job of coordinating questions in the final part of this webinar. Okay, so now we've said hello, we're just going to turn our cameras off just to help with people's broadband, because we want you to be able to see and hear what we're saying. So you'll see us again towards the end when we start answering the questions. So the first part of the webinar this evening will give you some more information on our consultation and proposals, and in particular what those potential changes mean for you in early years. We'll then follow this up at the end with a question and answer session. Thank you to those who've already submitted questions in advance of the meeting. That's been really helpful. But please do add any remaining questions that you have in the chat. We'll then feed these through to our panel of people in the second half of tonight's session. And we'll try and group those questions together so we can get through as many as we can. Okay, so we're going to start off with a bit of a background to the consultation, just to set the scene a little bit. So most importantly, what we want to say is that we want to build a better Ofsted. So we want to make sure that Ofsted is a modern world-class inspectorate and regulator, that we're fit for purpose, and most importantly, that we're trusted by parents, carers, children, learners, and the professionals that we work with. So in doing that, we want to reset our priorities, refine our practices, and rebuild our relationships with those in the sector. Since the tragic death of head teacher Ruth Perry 2 years ago, there has been a long and loud debate about Ofsted. Much of that debate centred on the impact inspections have on the professionals who educate our children. In response to that, we've introduced a raft of reforms with a particular focus on the welfare of staff. We then ran our Big Listen. That was the largest consultation in Ofsted's history, and we had over 22,000 responses to the Big Listen, with nearly 4,500 of those responses from children, and that was really important to us. This consultation builds on those reforms, builds on what we heard through the Big Listen. So what we're hoping to implement is a new way of inspecting and grading all education providers, from early years through schools to further education, and including initial teacher education. We want to retain the trust of the children and parents we work for, and regain the confidence of the dedicated professionals that we work with. And we really hope that these proposals that we'll be setting out this evening and that we began consulting on in February will help us achieve that. But this is a consultation, and we really want to hear from you all as to whether we're getting that right. So, collectively, what do we want to achieve? So like you all, we want high quality, inclusive education for every child, pupil and learner. And we want great outcomes for everyone, including those with SEND or those who are disadvantaged or vulnerable. And by disadvantaged, we mean those eligible for pupil premium funding, or EYPP, and or those children and learners who may be vulnerable due to their current circumstances, and that might be short or longer term. We also want to give better information from parents, and we heard a lot from parents as part of our consultation in terms of what that might, should or could look like. But most importantly, and this is quite difficult to reflect through a consultation, so we really want to talk about that this evening, we want to change how it feels to be inspected. So we want to move towards a collaborative and transparent approach to our inspection that encourages and supports providers to raise standards. We want to make changes to our early years, schools, fairs and initial teacher education inspections to respond to what we heard in the Big Listen. So we will base our inspections and reports on children, pupils and learners' development, their well-being, their experiences and their outcomes. We're introducing clearer criteria to support leaders on their continuous improvement journey. So the toolkits that you'll see and hear about as part of this evening's webinar should and could be used in between inspection to support continuous improvement. And as I've just said, we really want to make the inspection process more collaborative and transparent and be really clear about what providers should improve, while also recognising leaders' independence and expertise. And particularly important for us in early years is that we want to tailor the inspection process. We want it to feel like an early years inspection framework and ensure that it's nuanced to the particular part of the early years family that you belong to, whether that's being a childminder, a nursery, a preschool, an out-of-school club, etc. So we're now in the consultation phase, and as I've said, we're really looking to hear your views. So the changes we are engaging and consulting on are relevant to all providers which are currently inspected under the Education Inspection Framework. So for early years providers, that includes all providers which are registered on the early years register, so childminders, nurseries, childcare on domestic premises, childcare on non-domestic premises, after-school clubs, holiday provision. If you're interested in hearing more about other remits, such as schools or further education and skills, then you'd be welcome to attend other webinars which will focus particularly on those remits. So a quick look at the timeline. The formal consultation opened on the 3rd of February and that will close 12 weeks after that, so that's the 28th of April. We are undertaking some inspection testing and that will continue until the summer, and we hope to introduce renewed inspections in the autumn for early years providers including nurseries and childminders, schools including alternative provision and pupil referral units, further education providers including colleges, adult education, independent learning providers, employer providers, independent specialist colleges, and also from 2026, January 2026, initial teacher education providers. So that's a very brief outline of what the consultation is about. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Wendy, who's going to take us on to the next part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. So this evening I'm going to speak to you about our proposals for education inspections and then actually say a little bit more about what this means specifically for early years. So as Jane has already mentioned, that we want inspections that look and feel different for everyone. We want inspections to be a collaborative and transparent approach. We want to do our bit to help providers be places where children thrive and where there is high quality, inclusive education for every child. We want there to be great outcomes for everyone, including those with SEND and those who are disadvantaged, particularly those who are eligible for early years pupil premium. We want inspections to be to result in clear and accessible reporting that helps everyone understand the quality of the provision. And we want to build on the positive aspects of our current inspection framework. So for instance, that focus on curriculum and communication and language. So we're proposing to conduct inspections in a way that promotes professional conversation and collaboration, that starts with the premise that everyone is working within the legal expectations and professional frameworks expected of them. And for early years, we all know that that is the DfE's early years foundation stage. We want to conduct inspections in a way that understands and accounts for the unique context in which you work and have made decisions. and that seek to build a rounded picture of what you do, always seeking to find out what it's typically like to work, learn, and care in your setting, and accepts that there will always be some aspects of what you do that are better and more developed than others. And then finally, promotes a self-improving system that is inclusive of all and drives high and raising standards. So here are some of the proposed changes that will impact on all our education remits. The 5-point scale for our new report cards, the 5-point scale we're going to be using or proposing to use is exemplary, strong, secure, attention needed, and causing concern. We'll talk a little bit more about the new report cards on the next slide. Toolkits will provide guidance on what inspectors will be looking at and the evidence that they will be gathering. And all inspections will start by discussing the provider's work against the secure column and then seeing what it looks like on the ground. Inspectors and leaders in discussion will begin to broaden their evidence gathering across the remainder of the inspection. And before being on site, we will use an initial conversation to build productive relationships, to understand the context and the strengths of provision, as well as the areas that you as leaders are working on. And in determining the overall evaluation for each toolkit or evaluation area, which will then be reflected in the report card, the quality of leadership of that area and the extent of inclusive practice will take precedent. So kind of be those bookends. So let's just think a little bit about our proposed report cards. For reporting, we want to make sure that we report using an accessible format that can be read on tablets and phones. We want to provide clear information for parents and carers and the sectors that we inspect. We want to make sure that our reports are easy to navigate to find the information that is required. And we want to know what would be the most helpful way to design reports for different audiences. So we really need to hear from you. And then let's think about our proposed toolkits. The inspection framework and separate handbook will be replaced by one remit-specific product, which will have 3 parts. So the early years inspection handbook will be replaced, and there will be 3 parts to the new product. So part 1 will be the inspection framework, the why we inspect. It will be the overarching document that sets out the legal basis, the purpose, and the rationale for inspection across all provider types. And then there'll be the operating guide, the how, information on how to inspect a provider, and how the specific remit toolkit will apply in different settings. So this will be a technical guide for our inspectors, and will set out how we will use the toolkit for different provider types. So we know some of those in early years from childminders, out of school providers, as well as day nurseries as well. And then part 3 will be the toolkit itself. So what inspectors and provision leaders will use to encourage that professional dialogue when considering the evaluation areas and reaching grades. And this will replace our current grade descriptors in our early years inspection handbook. So let's now think about what these proposals mean for early years. So for early years providers, we will continue to inspect the overall quality and standards of early years provision in line with the principles and requirements of the statutory framework for the early years foundation stage, and this won't change. We're focused on priorities such as the quality of adult interactions and the importance of communication and language, and of course keeping children happy and safe. And we want to continue to report on what it's like to be a child at their early years setting, and also focus on priorities, actions, and the impact of settings. And then the early years, for what we're proposing to change in terms of early years inspection, is that the new evaluation areas will replace the current overall effectiveness grade. So there will no longer be an overall effectiveness grade. And we're proposing a two-part notification call where we gather information about the setting's context, curriculum, strengths, and areas for development. And professional dialogue between inspectors and leaders will be a priority moving forward. Every provider will be invited to have a nominee as part of the inspection, to nominate a senior member of staff to work closely with the inspector throughout the inspection. And for early years, we're thinking about this terminology because, of course, in early years, we have a nominated individual, and it's the nominee would be the person who knows the setting and knows the children best. And we'll be introducing an evaluation area on inclusion. And Sam's going to talk a little bit more about this a bit later on. And within early years, this includes a focus on children with SEND and those who are disadvantaged. And disadvantage means children eligible for early years pupil premium. And we'll also be aligning the renewed framework more closely to the EYFS, and that will enable us to undertake our dual role in early years as both the regulator and inspectorate more effectively. And it should give clarity to the sector about expectations. By aligning our renewed framework more closely to the EYFS, the standards set by the DfE that all providers must adhere to, we're making it really clear that we're not expecting any more than that. So let's think about our proposed evaluation areas. So they're on this slide here. So the proposed evaluation areas for registered early years providers, there are 8 evaluation areas, 7 of which will be we will grade against that 5-point scale, and safeguarding will be met, not met. So the quality of education is now curriculum, developing teaching and achievement. And in regard to developing teaching, we'll be looking at how leaders develop their staff. For childminders, this is how they identify their own gaps in knowledge and what they do about it and the impact it has on children. On inclusion, we'll be looking specifically at how a setting supports any children that may have a barrier to their learning and achieving. And welfare covers children's safety, health and well-being, and is more focused on children's happiness and feelings. Safeguarding covers what is in the toolkit. It is focused on making sure that children are cared for in that safe environment and protected from harm and abuse. And Sam is our next presenter this evening, and I'm going to hand over to Sam, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about our proposals for inclusion.
Thanks, Wendy. So, as we said earlier, the Big Listen gathered the views of over 4,000 children who ranked support for children with SEND among their top 5 inspection priorities. So that's one reason why we're proposing to make inclusion a key focus of all our inspections. Like those children, we really want to understand what leaders are doing to create a culture in which every child feels welcomed, safe, and valued. So inclusion is a brand new evaluation area that we'll look at in its own right. However, the experience and outcomes for disadvantaged and/or vulnerable children and those with SEND will also be a golden thread that runs through all evaluation areas of every aspect of provision. We've really put inclusion front and centre of our renewed framework. We know how important it is for those children with SEND or those who are disadvantaged to have the best possible chance in life and the best possible outcomes. So the toolkits across all remits set out how we propose to hold providers to account for ensuring inclusive education. This includes strong outcomes for disadvantaged children, those with SEND, and those who leaders have identified as being particularly vulnerable, taking into account that the factors that make a child vulnerable may vary across different settings and at different times in their lives. The toolkits have been informed by our working definition of inclusion that you can see on the next few slides. and we've engaged with the sector and our inclusion external reference group to agree this working definition and our approach to inspecting inclusion. And our consultation seeks your views on this working definition of inclusion and how we will inspect inclusion. So the next few slides is our working definition of inclusion that we're asking for your views on in the consultation. Inclusive providers are at the heart of their communities. They have high expectations and aspirations for every child and learner. They're particularly alert to the needs of those who need the most support to achieve well, including those with special educational needs and/or disabilities. Inclusion is where leaders set a clear and ambitious vision for inclusion at the setting. They communicate this to children, staff, and parents and carers, and they create a culture in which every child belongs and feels safe, welcomed, and valued. And they make sure that all children access a high-quality education taught by experts with high ambition who strive to develop every child's potential. An inclusive setting is one where leaders work in a close and effective partnership with parents and carers and other agencies to secure the best possible outcomes for every child, regardless of their starting points. Inclusive providers are relentless in identifying and removing barriers to participation and learning so that all children can achieve and thrive. Now, each Education Remits Toolkit has a number of evaluation areas, and as Wendy said, in early years there are 8. On the slide here, you can see across the top, there are the grades, and we'll always start on the assumption that the setting is at least secure. Now, secure means that the provider is offering a secure standard of education, and this includes meeting the EYFS legal requirements and the expectations set out in non-statutory guidance. So the one on the slide is developing teaching, and within each evaluation area, you will see that there are themes. So for developing teaching, we've got, it starts with leadership of teaching and then professional development and so on. And each evaluation area within the toolkit starts with the leadership of that area. And then at the end of each evaluation area, apart from the inclusion one and the safeguarding one, there will be the theme of inclusion, which is what we said runs through all of the toolkits. As explained in the consultation documents, to decide what the grade is for each evaluation area, inspectors will focus on leadership of the area and the extent of inclusive practices in it. So, for example, for inspectors to grade curriculum as secure, the leadership of the curriculum and the inclusive nature of the curriculum must be secure. And then the other curriculum standards can be stronger or less well developed. But inspectors will always draw out the standards within each toolkit that were stronger or less developed than others. And this will help to form the paragraphs that we write in the report card for each evaluation area. So in the draft toolkit and the curriculum area for developing teaching, we're proposing that settings that are providing a secure standard of education for children who have SEND and/or who are disadvantaged will be providing high quality inclusive teaching across the intended curriculum. They are settings where practitioners respond sensitively to children's learning needs and rates of learning, identifying any barriers that they might have. And teaching prioritises the aspects that children need most support with, making sure that they receive the right help at the right time. Now, in the evaluation area for curriculum, if a setting is secure in inclusion, its curriculum is ambitious and developmentally appropriate for all children, including those with SEND and those who are disadvantaged. It's sufficiently flexible to take account of children's different starting points, their individual needs, rates of learning, and stages of development. And the curriculum recognises and promotes equality and diversity and supports children to reflect on their similarities and to understand what makes them unique. And as you know, that's already a requirement of the EYFS. Children with SEND and those who are disadvantaged achieve well in settings where achievement is secure. Gaps between the achievement of these groups of children and that of others are narrowing quickly. Children with SEND make good progress, particularly in developing their communication and language skills. And in settings that are secure in inclusive behaviour, attitudes and establishing routines, Practitioners understand and consider each child's context, their needs and challenges when managing their behaviour and making reasonable adjustments and any adaptations to maintain the high expectations of behaviour that reflect their age and stage of development. Our draft toolkit proposes that children, including those with SEND or who are disadvantaged, develop a strong sense of belonging through respectful, warm and positive relationships that promote their well-being effectively in settings that take inclusive approaches to welfare and well-being. Where barriers to positive well-being and welfare exist for some babies and children, practitioners work closely with families and other agencies to support their good development. Ultimately, inclusive settings have inclusive practices. So these are settings where across their work, inclusive practices are secure so that all children feel safe, welcome and supported. They identify and meet needs to remove barriers to learning. So this means leaders quickly and accurately identify children who have additional needs or face barriers to their learning and or well-being. They make sure that these children receive effective support, drawing on external agencies and specialists where needed. And there is a suitable graduated approach which meets children's needs effectively. And the progress check at age 2 and practitioners' knowledge of children's progress across the curriculum support the accurate and timely identification of children's special educational needs. Inclusive settings are where leaders have a secure understanding of and effective arrangements to identify the needs of disadvantaged children and or those with SEND. Their support for disadvantaged children and those with SEND is effective and they draw on that specialist guidance where they need to. For children with SEND, leaders' arrangements reflect the requirements of the 0 to 25 SEND Code of Practice, and that's a requirement of the EYFS too. Leaders make sure that their approach to disadvantaged children and those with SEND is sustained, including through ongoing training and support for staff. They use early years pupil premium effectively and it's monitored effectively so that it has a demonstrable positive impact on children's learning, development and welfare. And leaders work collaboratively with parents, which ensures that they're able to identify and support all children to access any funding to which they're entitled. Where there's an inclusive culture, leaders have established a culture that welcomes all children, regardless of their background, their circumstances, or their individual needs. They understand and meet their legal responsibilities under the Equality Act 2010, including the fair and equal treatment of practitioners, parents and carers and children, and you'll know that that's a requirement of the EYFS. They're committed to working closely with external partners to meet the holistic needs of all children, including those with SEND, and children and parents feel that they're listened to and valued in their settings community. So I hope that helps you to understand our proposed approach to inclusion and you recognise that there really isn't anything over and above what's already required by the EYFS. I'm going to hand back to Jane now at this point, who's going to take us through to the second part of our webinar tonight.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Sam and Wendy, for taking us through those slides. So in a moment, we'll be moving on to the question and answer part of this evening. But before we do, just a little bit of a quick reminder on how you can share your views. This genuinely is a consultation. We really need to hear your views on this and the whole draft of our early years toolkit. So please use this opportunity to go in if you haven't already and look at the consultation documents and please do respond. We're really determined that our reforms will help shine a spotlight on the experiences and outcomes of children with SEND. So we're really encouraging early years providers, practitioners and all of those who work in the SEND system to share their thoughts so we can refine and improve our plans to help us meet that ambition, or actually ensure that we meet that ambition. So as I said, we really want your views to help us shape this. The only way to have your say heard is by completing our consultation. There's lots of ways of doing that. So our proposed changes for improving the way we inspect education can be found on the gov.uk/Ofsted that you can see here on this slide. You can submit your views via an online survey, which is our consultation. A link to the consultation is at the top of our web page, so just look for share your views, or you can scan this code, which will take you right there. So I'll give people a couple of seconds if they're getting their cameras out. We'll also show this slide again towards the end of the webinar, so don't worry if you're slightly slow with technology like me. We're also hoping to run a focus group to hear from a small number of EY practitioners in more detail. Now, if you'd be interested in hearing more about these focus groups, then please would you comment focus group in the chat, and then we'll send you some further details of how you can get involved in those focus groups. Okay, we're going to turn our cameras back on and move to the final part of the webinar. So this is your chance to ask any questions that you'd like to. As I said at the beginning, I know lots of you have already really helpfully submitted questions, but please do add anything to the chat and we'll answer as many of those as we can tonight. I think we've got about 25 minutes left in the session. So you've met the panel. I don't need to introduce everyone again. So while I'll turn on my camera, I'll hand over to you, Jude, to kick us off with the first question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks so much. We've had lots of questions prior to the webinar, so thank you everybody for submitting those. And I can see all the questions that have been coming in during these slides. So let's try and cover as much as we can. Firstly, we've got some questions around the existing grade of outstanding. So I'm going to come to you, Helen, if that's okay. So two questions quite similar. So the first one is, our setting recently got outstanding. Will we have the same opportunities to get that prestigious recognition? And then similarly, is exemplary on a par with the outstanding judgment?
Thank you, Jude, and hopefully I'll be able to answer that question. The first thing to say is obviously by removing the single word judgment, there will not in the future be such a thing as an outstanding provider as such, and instead of that there will be these evaluation areas that will receive one of the new evaluation judgments. So I think that's really important to say first of all. What we're not trying to do is tie them into our current full judgment areas that we've got. So they will be very different. In order to get exemplary for one of the evaluation areas, you need to be secure across the board in the other evaluation areas. And it might be that an element of your practice is particularly strong, which might lead the inspector to believe that there is some exemplary practice going on. So comparing the two is like comparing apples and pears, I'm afraid. And we've deliberately done that because what we're trying to do is to actually make a much more nuanced approach to how we look at each individual provider and the context with which they sit in. So that's really important. So I hope that explains it, Jude.
Thank you. And on a similar theme with outstanding, we've had a question around when will outstanding settings be inspected with the new framework? Wendy, can I come to you for that one?
Yeah, absolutely, Jude. And I think there's something about, just building on from what Helen was saying, there's something about our change. We're going to have to change our language a bit in terms of, that move away from the current overall effectiveness grades that we've got at the moment. And yeah, really good question. So settings that are currently judged as outstanding will be inspected within their 6-year window, so that bit of it won't change. And then one of the things that we're looking at the moment is around our re-inspection triggers once we're in the new the renewed inspection framework. But maybe we can talk a little bit more about that a bit later.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've had a question in the question chat from Jamie around inspection activities, and we've had a question also around what will the inspection day look like, and will the length of inspections change? So Sam, would you be able to cover that for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Jude. So First of all, there are no proposed changes to the current length of inspections. And what we really hope is that the proposed changes mean that there's more time for inspectors to understand the context of the setting, as well as observing practice. And we also hope that the toolkit means that we can be more focused on what the setting is doing well and where any improvements can be made. So in terms of the inspection activities, that we're hoping that leaders will spend more time with us on inspection, being able to see what it is that we see and hear, and we'll be spending most of our time observing the interactions between adults and children. We'll be taking time away from each other to reflect, and then we will be coming back together to have those evaluative discussions with the leaders throughout the inspection. So we are really proposing that inspectors take those purposeful reflection times and opportunities for evaluative discussions with leaders, and then combined with the shared observations that we make, we really do anticipate that inspections shouldn't take any longer than they do now.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know something that we've been giving very careful thought to, and we've had a question on this. Sam, I'm going to come to you for this one as well, if that's okay. So will there be any changes to the notice given to nursery providers prior to an inspection taking place?
So we are proposing to make some minor changes to notifications that we make to providers. So first of all, we're proposing to introduce a second part to the notification call. Wendy mentioned it earlier, and in that part of the call, we want to really understand the settings context that they're working in, their curriculum overview, and what they see as their strengths and areas for development, what they've done since the last inspection. And we'd also like to use that call to agree areas of inspection focus together. So that's something new too, because at the moment inspectors in early years come up with the areas of inspection focus based on their pre-inspection planning and what we know about the provider. And because we will be having that discussion about context with leaders during the second part of the notification call, it means that we can arrive at those areas of inspection focus together. So that means, because we're going to be introducing, or we're proposing to introduce, the second part of the notification call, it's likely that we'll make an earlier notification in the morning, just as schools do, likely to be before 10 o'clock. And that will be a short call to make the notification and make arrangements for the second part of the call later on the same day. And then for childminders, we're also considering a change that would mean we still give up to 5 days notice, but that we let you know what day will be coming, rather than what we do now, which is to say that if we haven't arrived by a certain time, then we're not coming that day.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. And we've had a question around consistency, a question submitted prior to the webinar, but also we've had a question from Vicky in the chat around consistency as well. And I know this has been an important aspect for us to respond to from the Big Listen. But the question originally that we had was, how will Ofsted ensure consistency and fairness between inspectors? So can I come to you, Helen, on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jude. I suppose the whole purpose of inspection is that it's a human process, isn't it? We deliberately don't go for a sort of tick box exercise. And I suppose we've heard a lot through the Big Listen and through our interactions with colleagues out there in the sector about this, the importance of consistency. I see it more as what we're really committed to is a consistent approach to inspection. What we really want to see is that our inspectors that go out there are well trained, that they know what they're doing, that they understand the context of each individual provider. And I'm sure all of you that are listening into this call tonight will appreciate that you want the context of what you're trying to do with the children that attend your provision. You want that to be taken into consideration, and what you want is well-trained inspectors who are able to undertake the inspection in a consistent manner. Now, one of the commitments we've made recently is to make sure that we publish all of our training moving forward, so that you can see some of the training that inspectors undergo, and I think that will help with transparency. And I also want to, if you don't mind, Jude, some of the anxiety around the number of grades that will be given, and I know there's a couple of comments in the chat about people feeling quite anxious about that. What we hope this will do is mean that all providers, there'll be a much more nuanced understanding of what providers do exceptionally well and what their strengths are really. And as you said earlier in the presentation, it will be very much us starting from the premise that you are secure, that you are doing a really great job in each of the evaluation areas. So we don't think it will add work. We're obviously testing that out in the moment. We hope it will alleviate that, and it will alleviate some of the issues that people complain about regarding consistency. So I hope that answers the question.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I can see from lots of the chat and messages that we have loads of childminders in the webinar, which is brilliant. And we've had lots of kind of childminder specific questions. So Wendy, I'm going to come to you for this one. Some concern around the changes that we're proposing and whether they're actually sort of practical for childminders as lone workers, and how all of that will work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really, really great question, isn't it? And I think that's one of the things that we're really, really mindful of. And as Helen has said, that we're in the process. Jane showed it on one of the slides that she was talking to in the timeline, where we're out and about and we're testing these proposals, and we're testing these with childminders. And I think one of the things that we're finding is that we already have those collaborative discussions with childminders as part of the inspection process now, and we need to make sure that we keep what works well, and that's why we need to hear from childminders about any changes that you think we could or should be making. And I think one of the things around is where Sam's talked a little bit about the second part of a notification call, a longer bit of conversation where we think we have talk about what it is that you the context of your setting, your strengths, what's working well, and coming up with those areas of inspection focus together. So there'll be an opportunity to have some of those conversations ahead of the inspection, so that, and I think it's fair to say that we've had some feedback from some of our test visits, for example, where childminders and providers have said, actually, it's felt better that it doesn't feel like we're on the back foot, for example. So we know what's coming. So we're kind of like working through some of this, and really important that you have a look at the consultation and have your say, because that's going to really help us make sure that we get this right.
Brilliant, thank you. And just sort of as an extension of that, a question around lone working childminders who don't have assistants, and just around I suppose the practicalities of how we'll inspect leadership and governance. Sam, can I come to you for that one?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Jude, and I'm really pleased to see that so many childminders have joined us tonight. And I started my career in early years as a childminder, so I always love to have these conversations with my colleagues. So when we look at the detail of the evaluation area for leadership and governance, most, if not all, standards can be applied to childminders. It's merely a matter of language, because at the end of the day, childminders are the leaders of their setting. So if we replace leaders with the word childminders, then the standards are applicable. But we really want to hear from childminders if they don't feel that is the case. And the reason that we feel they're applicable is because we've based the secure standards on the principles and requirements of the EYFS. We're not asking childminders to do anything more than what is required of the EYFS.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, this is a big question. I'm going to come to Jane for this. Sorry, Jane. But this is a question around impact. So we've had a question sort of prior to the webinar around what impact do you expect these changes to make, but also a question in the chat from Diane around how will we know it's working? So what kind of impact do we expect, and how will we know?
Lovely, thanks Jude. So I think most importantly in terms of the impact, we want it to feel different for you out there as providers, and we want it to feel collaborative to enable it to facilitate that professional discussion based on those evaluation areas. So I think that's a really key impact that we want to have with this new framework. We also really want to make sure that it feels relevant to people as early years providers, that they don't feel shoehorned into another remits framework, which was some of the feedback that we had in the big listen. And as well as being as feeling like it belongs to early years, we also want to nuance it depending on the provision you operate. So we've had a bit of a discussion around Childminders there, and we are particularly looking at Childminders working with some of your external reference group and Childminders as well working out there, and certainly we're testing this framework with providers in settings as part of that piloting process. And the other thing is that we really want to shine that spotlight on inclusion and SEND, as Sam talked about as well as part of the webinar, so that we ensure that that golden thread of inclusion is threaded through all that we do. In terms of how we'll know if the framework's working, then, you know, as an organisation, we'll be looking to review that, to talk to yourselves as providers, to hear what you have to say on that, and to talk to your external stakeholders as well. So we're in a period of consultation at the moment. We'll take into consideration those views and feedbacks in determining what that framework looks like from the autumn term, and then we will constantly look at reviewing that as we do now with the current framework. So I hope that goes some way to answering the question there, Jude.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had a few questions, different questions, but around reinspection. So around reinspection plans, particularly for settings that are not meeting secure or strong, and how we'll go about deciding on the reinspection time frame. So Wendy, can I come to you for those?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's something we're doing a lot of thinking about at the moment and working through. So currently, colleagues on the call will know that if you've got a current good or outstanding, you fall into that 6-year window. And then if it requires improvement, we come back within 12 months. And then if it's inadequate overall, it's within 6 months. So what we're doing through our testing is we're considering how we will apply the re-inspection triggers. So when would we come back within the six years? Are we happy to walk away from this place knowing that it's secure across evaluation areas, and that we can leave it for 6 years? And for example, we're likely to want to come back sooner when an evaluation area is causing concern, or if safeguarding is not met. So we're working through some of those at the moment, and we'll be able to say more about that as we publish the outcome of the consultation.
Thank you. Now this question, we've had a question prior to the webinar, and then a question from Lorraine around wraparound care, and Nick also about different types of providers. So Wendy, sorry, I'm going to come back to you, but can you just give us any examples of how the toolkits might be used for sort of different types of providers?
Yeah, I think so. And again, we're doing some of this in the testing. And again, it's really good. We want to really hear from different provider types. When you go in and have a look at the consultation, is there anything that isn't quite right? Do we need to make anything? Is there anything we need to make clearer? So what we will do is we will give clear explanations of how we use the toolkit in different provider types within that early years operational guide, the how bit I talked about a bit earlier in the presentation. So for example, we will explain that we will not look at the evaluation areas for curriculum, developing teaching, and achievement for out of school settings. And that's because the DfE sets the requirements, and because DfE sets the requirements, and out of school providers don't have to meet the learning and development requirements of the EYFS. So we need to make sure that we get that nuance right within the operational guide so that it's clear for everybody what we do. And I guess another example might be is things around what would this mean for forest schools, and it's the DfE that sets the requirements for all early years providers, including forest schools, within the statutory framework, the EYFS, and there's no changes to these, so therefore we continue to inspect settings that choose to teach children using a particular approach, so for example, it might be the forest school approach in the same way as we do now, and in the same way that we do other providers registered on the early years register. Hope that helps.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of time, and we've had lots of questions around this one, so I'm going to come to this question next. Helen mentioned this around there being 8 evaluation areas. So I think some people are expressing some concern about, is this increased workload? What will be the impact? Is this giving us kind of more hoops to jump through? We've had questions from Diane, from Christine, from Sophie and Alex in the chat. So Sam, can I come to you for that one?
Yeah, okay, so I do appreciate it might look like there's more to consider on inspection because there are 8 evaluation areas rather than the 4 judgment areas, but in reality we're not proposing to look at anything more than we currently do. What we've done is to break down what we look at into smaller chunks, if you like, so that we can be more nuanced, as Helen said, about where aspects of a provision are stronger and where attention might be needed. And we're really hoping that this means that we have better reporting on where there are strengths and where improvements might need to be made, and we can be clearer so that this supports settings to focus their efforts on where they're needed most in their improvement journey.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. And again, a few questions around how the toolkit works for early years in schools and maintain nurseries. We've had questions prior to the webinar and from Tim and Shushila. So Wendy, can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Jude. And maybe I should have included that as an example in that previous question you asked me about, those nuances for different providers. And this of course is a great question. And Sam was sharing that her practitioner days started as a childminder. I've worked in maintained nursery schools, so definitely a great question for me. And of course, we know, don't we, that as an inspectorate and regulator, we're required to do the 2 different things in 2 different places. So as in registered early years, we're the inspectorate and the regulator, and then in early years for schools and in a maintained nursery school, we are the inspectorate only and not the regulator. So, and an early years in schools is very much part of the whole inspection, whereas registered early years is the whole inspection. And this is something that we heard a lot about from schools in our Big Listen. And one of the things that we've made a commitment to in our Big Listen response, because we heard from primary schools and maintained nursery schools that those who inspect EY in schools do not always have the knowledge they need in order to be undertaking those inspections. So we've made a commitment to improve this, and we've started that journey already. But in terms of the toolkit and what we're proposing in the consultation, because maintained nursery schools and early years in schools are schools, then you need to have a look at the schools toolkit and see what we're proposing there, so that you've got that real opportunity to say if something is missing or it's not clear, because this is a particular area that we want to get right. And again, similarly with early years, we're doing various test visits we're also doing those test visits in schools and looking at early years, and also doing some test visits in maintained nursery schools as well. So it's a really good time for us to make sure that we get, regardless of where a 3-year-old is experiencing the early education, that actually what we come and look at, we get it right. And that's something that we've made a commitment to in the Big Listen, but would urge everybody who's working in early years in a school or a maintained nursery school, have a look at the school toolkit and provide us with feedback on that, so it helps us to make sure that we get those changes right.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm sorry that we've not managed to get to every question, but hopefully that's been helpful. I'm just going to hand back to Jane.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jude, for guiding us through all those questions there. So we've only got a small amount of time left, so I'm going to draw the webinar to a close now. But a huge thank you to all our panel members for all your insights this evening. It's been really interesting to hear the questions that have been posed to us and the answers that we've given. I hope you found this webinar useful, and please, final reminder, your views really are important to us, so please can you go online and complete our consultation survey. Remember, it's open until the 28th of April. So thank you ever so much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.